Thank you.
Justice.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is MTGO Traders. My name is Taryn, and this is the banned and restricted announcement for January 15th, 2018. We're not going to waste any time, and we're going to get right into it. This is the full list of cards that are getting banned for Standard. Announcement date, January 15th, 2018. Standard, Attuned with Aether is banned. Yes. Rogue Refiner is banned. Rampaging Froston is banned? That's interesting. And Ramunap Ruins is also banned. And of course, the reasoning for this is because if we ban energy, the Ramunap Red strategy would most likely take over. A lot of people are saying that a control strategy is going to take over, but because Rivals of Ixalan is so fast, I highly doubt that. Obviously, it's going to be a wait-and-see approach on that particular situation, but let's just kind of read through this really quickly here. Effective date for online is January 15th, 2018, so if you guys are playing with Ramunap Red or Rampaging Frostodon, now would be the time to change it. And of course, they always provide a list of all banned and restricted cards by formats. And of course, the next banned and restricted announcement will be February 12th, 2018. So that might be something for Modern in the future, perhaps. Going to read this really quickly. R&D has been carefully monitoring the evolution of Standard environment since the rotation of the release of Ixalan. While the play patterns are generally healthy and games are strategically deep, the environment has been dominated for several months by two archetypes, Temur Energy and Ramunap Red. Together, these two archetypes represent more than 40% of the competitive metagame, and both boast significant positive records against the rest of the field in terms of non-mirror match win percentage. This is despite the best efforts of the metagame to adapt and counter these decks. Absolutely, we've been talking about this for months, and here we go. Temur Energy and other energy variants. Having recognized the best deck in an environment is common, and it is not in itself a situation warranting bannings. In many cases, what is considered the best deck changes over time as the metagame evolves and new sets are released. However, in this case, the combination of three factors has necessitated intervention. 1. The length of time for which these decks have been dominant, as long as 5 months or more, depending on how one categorized different energy variants. Exactly. Once the energy came out, it basically just destroyed the format and took it over, and has been that way ever since. 2. Standard rotation did not meaningfully weaken these decks or result in new decks that are competitive with them. Exactly. Anything that rotated out really didn't replace anything because they didn't really need anything because energy was kind of in a vacuum. 3. Despite the metagame having many months to adapt to these decks, counterplay options have proven insufficient. Exactly. You just can't beat energy with so much value on turn 1 and 2. Temur Energy and Temur Black variants together make up a significantly larger portion of the standard metagame than any other deck. Historically, the most played deck at the beginning of the standard season occupies about 10% of the metagame, with other decks vying for this top spot. As the metagame settles toward the end of the season, it's not uncommon for the emergent most played deck to occupy 20% of the metagame. Then this gets shaken up again with the release of the next set. However, the problem with this one, of course, is that the archetype did not do that. As soon as a new set would come out, like Ixalan, energy would just stay at the top of the slot. However, when an archetype begins a season immediately after the release of a new set with the metagame shares of 20% or higher, that's when it starts raising red flags for us. Temur Energy began Ixalan season in that range and only increased its hold on the format. Currently, it sits at around 30% of the Magic Online Competitive League metagame, which is dumb. That's close to Callblade numbers, by the way. The highest metagame percentage we've seen over the past 2 years. The number is even higher at Premier events, both physical and digital. It's more important to note that there are many ways to categorize and distinguish energy-based decks from one another. While one player may group together all the decks that play Attuned with Aether, for example, into a large energy category, another may recognize the differences between Temur Energy, Temur Black, Sultai Energy, Sultai Red, Pummeler variants, and so on. We were careful to consider this in our analysis of the environment and look at these decks both as separate entities and in aggregate. Let's take a look at some of the online data for Temur Energy gathered from Magic Online competitive leagues. This chart is representative of what we've seen throughout the season, slicing the data in different ways and taking samples across time. One of the things, of course, for Magic that you guys know is that, the data that we really want is really not represented ever, which is really annoying for us, and it really kind of keeps us in the dark. But of course, we know, what the most popular deck is, what needs to be banned, things like that, because we're players that are into the game and are kind of aware of what's happening in the Pro Tour and in the competitive league and tournament matches. And here we go. Here's the complete layout here. I'm not going to go over that completely, but you can kind of follow the link in the description to kind of see that. But we can kind of go down here. This particular chart groups Temur Energy together with Temur Black variants, though general findings hold a similar analysis that break them apart. The first column shows the overall win percentage of Temur Energy against the second deck. The second column is the game 1 win percentage, and the third third is the win percentage for post-sideboard game. So basically, they're favored in game 1, and they get even more favored in game 2 because there are so many good pieces for Temur Energy and Temur Black. While some decks boast a significant advantage in the pre-sideboard game, in almost all cases, Temur Energy is able to reconfigure post-sideboard to pull ahead. This is especially notable in the cases of approach decks, blue-white cycling, which have extremely favorable game 1 win percentages, but ultimately are unfavorable in the match overall. And that's because of the, of course, negates and low counterspells we have in the format. With the exception of red-green Pummeler along with Energy variant itself, none of the other decks that represent a significant portion of the metagame are able to reach a truly favorable matchup against Temur Energy. It is because of this inability of the metagame to adjust to Temur Energy's dominance that we identified the need for ban restricted intervention. And thank you, we've been saying this for weeks. When examining candidates for banning, we analyzed what makes energy decks so powerful, consistent, and difficult to counter. Our goals were as follows. 1. Reduce the overall win percentage of Temur Energy and other energy-related variants, while still preserving the competitive capability of the core of the deck. Of course, Attune with Aether and Rogue Refiner aren't going to shut down energy decks completely, but it will be a way to slow down the deck, and that's exactly what we needed. 2. Open space in the metagame for other decks to excel above energy decks in certain areas and to force energy decks to build towards different strengths and weaknesses. Perfect. 3. Allow for easier counterplay against energy decks. This is what we were talking about just a minute ago. We need a better sideboard game plan against the energy decks. And 4. Preserve the most fun gameplay and deck building elements while reducing frustrating ones, like Rogue Refiner, which gave you 2 energy and drew you a card and was a 3/2 on turn 3. It's just dumb. The cards we gave the strongest consideration were Attune with Aether, that's a given, Rogue Refiner, of course, Aether Hub, which I feel like would be weird if they banned that, Long Tusk Hub, which I could understand, and Whirler Virtuoso, which is in itself kind of its own infinite deck, which is crazy. Ultimately, we decided on Attune with Aether and Rogue Refiner, 2 cards that produce incidental free energy alongside an effect that is almost strong enough to play on its own, which is exactly the point. Turn 1 getting free energy is dumb, and Rogue Refiner, as soon as it dies, it still gives you 2 energy and a card, which is still dumb. These 2 cards are the most common non-land cards among all energy variants and the 2 of the most ubiquitous cards in Standard. Yep, they're basically every energy deck. Without Attune with Aether, energy decks will need to make more difficult decisions on how many colors to play and how to structure their mana bases. This may cause 4-color energy decks to break down into multiple 2 or 3-color decks with different strategies, strengths, and weaknesses. And yeah, that was the problem because of Attune with Aether. It basically made it so the opponent could play every single color they wanted to. You had even 5-color decks in energy because Attune with Aether was just so oppressive thanks to that and Aether Hub. Additionally, cards that spend energy with less immediate impact without the head start of 2 additional energy often present from turn 1, allowing for a greater window of counterplay and more branching paths in which the game can evolve. Rogue Refiner is what we term a generous rate card. Not generous, oppressive. One that simply provides a lot of value for little investment. The additional card advantage and energy make it difficult for other mid-range and control decks to go over the top of the energy decks in a long game. Like with Attune with Aether, it also advances the power level and immediate impact of energy spending cards. Rogue Refiner also provides a strong pull towards blue and thus towards playing 3 or 4 colors. 3 or more colors, sorry. This makes what could be a different energy deck play and feel more like one another. Yeah, exactly. Rogue Refiner basically just defined the format with Attune with Aether, making it so they had to play blue and green, and then of course get into red or get into black. We decided not to take action against any of the energy spending cards. In the case of Long Tusk Cub, removing Attune with Aether already prevents many of the frustrating early starts that can cause Cub to snowball out of control. Next, Whirler Virtuoso is one of the strongest cards against Ramunap Red, which preserves the 2nd most popular deck and most winning deck on Magic Online. We decided to preserve Whirler Virtuoso so as to not inadvertently improve Ramunap Red's already strong position in the metagame. In general, preserving energy spending cards allows for more variation in the deck building and gameplay among different energy decks that choose different spenders. So I do agree that Whirler Virtuoso was a great counter to Ramunap Red. The problem again with Whirler Virtuoso is that it comes in and gives 3 energy, just like with Bristling Hydra and other things like that. But 3 energy, I feel like on turn 3 and not drawing a card is better than 2 energy and drawing a card, like with the Rogue Refiner. Finally, we took no action against Aether Hub, finding the loss of Attune with Aether to already be sufficient hit to the consistency and win percentage of energy decks. Further preserving Aether Hub may open up deck building avenues to non-green decks that use energy, like blue, red, and Grixis energy decks we've seen from time to time. Yeah, I agree. Banning Aether Hub would have shut down energy in a big way, and I do feel like that we don't want to shut down energy, we just want to de-level it a little bit. Therefore, in order to reduce the overall win percentage of energy decks and allow for more counterplay, Attune with Aether and Rogue Refiner are banned in Standard. Please note that we expect energy decks to remain a competitive, viable component of the metagame even after this change. So yeah, I agree. Even banning with Attune and Rogue Refiner, energy decks are still going to be powerful, but they won't be oppressive. And that is an important distinction to make. Moving on to the other changes they made with Ramunap Red here. While Temur Energy was the most played deck in Standard, Ramunap Red was the most winning deck with a metagame share above 2%. In Standard, when measured by Magic Online competitive leagues and excluding mirror matches, let's take a look at some of the data. Now, they have the full data here. Of course, the Game 1 game plan, they're very favored, and in Game 2, they're more favored as well. But of course, we know this Ramunap Red is a very fast strategy, and that's why it has such a good winning percentage. In this chart, the percentages are how often Ramunap defeats the deck. In the second column, notice that Ramunap Red has positive matchups against the entire field except Temur Energy and Green-Red Pummeler. In fact, Ramunap Red's non-mirror, non-Temur match win percentage in this format is a staggering 60%. That's why it's so hard to deal with. For comparison, historically, the best deck in the late season format settles around 52 to 53% in the field. So, of course, we could have built counter decks to the Ramunap Red strategy, like any kind of life gain strategy. However, the problem was that we had Temur Energy to also contend with, and those life gain decks were not good against energy decks. And it kind of made this weird situation where, like, you would either win against Ramunap Red or you would win against energy. You couldn't win against both. The power of Ramunap Red may come as somewhat of a surprise since it has taken a second seat to Temur Energy in terms of high-profile finishes in Premier Leagues. In actuality, it is only because of the popularity of Temur Energy that Ramunap Red hasn't been more successful. Exactly. Though Ramunap Red beats most of the rest of the decks in the field, its single worst matchup is the most popular deck, which is, of course, Temur Energy. In taking action against Temur Energy, we must be careful in reducing the power level and metagame share of one of Ramunap Red's only natural enemies. Otherwise, there is a risk of creating a one-deck metagame in which nothing beats Ramunap Red, and I agree. On the other hand, we also discussed and considered the degree to which the energy decks have been warping the format. It is possible that the widespread presence of Temur Energy has been suppressing other decks that have been positive matchups against Ramunap Red, but lose to Temur Energy, which is true. That's what I just said a minute ago. However, after an extensive analysis, Magic Online, and real-world tournament data, we determined that taking no action against Red would likely result in a less healthy, less fun metagame, and I agree. Our goal in bringing down the power level of the red decks were the same as with energy variants. We want to reduce overall win percentages of the deck without removing it from the competitive viability and also increase the potential for counterplay. And of course, they give a list here. The cards they were considered taking were Ramunap Ruins, which is what they did, Rampaging Ferocidon, which is what they did, Ursaker Kinner, which is kind of good, On-Crop Crasher, I would disagree with that. Bomat Courier, a very good card, and Hazoret the Fervent. A lot of people were talking about Hazoret as being the main card to ban in Ramunap Red, but I do think the Ruins and Ferocidon are good as well. I do think that especially Ramunap Ruins, because this card can basically just end a match by itself sometimes, and it's really impressive, thanks to Sunscorched Ruins being in the deck as well, or Sunscorched Desert rather. Ramunap Ruins adds a lot of invisible power to the deck, exactly. Often acting as a virtual reduction to the opponent's starting life total, it also provides a high level of inevitability in matchups that go long, such as against the blue-black control decks popular at last year's World Championship, which have since fallen out of favor, in part because of this. Without Ramunap Ruins, the general play pattern of the deck remains largely the same, but the deck will lose some amount of free win percentage that this land contributed. Exactly. Now, again, this is kind of another thing that a lot of people are going to say is that, well, control is now going to take over the format, but again, just said earlier, the new cards from Rivals of Ixalan and Ixalan originally are very fast, and I do think that they can get underneath that control strategy. For many players, Rampaging Ferocidon is likely the most surprising card we've taken action against. After all, many Ramunap Red decks don't play 4 copies in their main deck. However, in analyzing the evolution of the metagame over time, as well as contrasting pre- and post-sideboard game win percentages, we have determined this to be one of the cards that most discourages and invalidates counterplay against the deck. It's worth noting that Rampaging Ferocidon was designed at the time when Saheeli Rai and Felidar Guardian decks were coming to dominance in the real world, in part to counter those decks. This is interesting to me because I feel like this is basically like an admittance of being like, okay, well, we realized Saheeli Rai and Felidar Guardian existed, was going to be a deck, and we produced Rampaging Ferocidon in the future set to deal with that deck, but because Saheeli Rai and Felidar Guardian took over the format, they had to ban it, and so Rampaging Ferocidon doesn't make sense in Standard. So, weird. While Rampaging Ferocidon may have been an appropriate answer card in a more powerful metagame that contained that combo, it has instead proven to cause collateral damage against other decks aiming to counter aggressive red strategies. Yeah, basically, it's like the Eidolon of Great Revel, but in Standard right now. 2 strategies that have historically been effective against aggressive red decks have been flooding the board with small creatures and gaining life. Over time, we've seen the rise and fall of decks designed to counter Ramunap Red like Abzan and Esper Token variants, and Oketra's Monument decks like Mono White Vampires, which I do think is still a great deck right now. Initially, these were unfavorable matchups for Ramunap Red, but as the red decks adopted more copies of Rampaging Ferocidon in their sideboards and even their main decks, they were able to turn these matchups positive again. So yeah, against the Oketra Monument strategy, Rampaging Ferocidon was awful to deal with. Game 2 game plan against Ramunap Red, you basically just had to board and cast outs or Ixalan's bindings for the Ferocidon. Earthshaker, Kinra, and Non-Crep Crasher were two other cards we looked at and determined making counterplay blocking more difficult. However, many aggressive red decks have moved away from playing 4 copies of each of these, which I feel like since they're removing some of the cards from Ramunap Red, these cards will start to be more prevalent in those decks, so I don't know how they're going to kind of predict that. And even those that do, the next best option aren't much weaker. Ultimately, these would be too low impact to be worth further disrupting the environment with a ban. Conversely, we believe that banning Bomat Courier or Hazard the Fervent would too dramatically change the play pattern of the decks and its win percentage. Yeah, I agree with that, but again, Hazard the Fervent has very little answers in the format still. Vraska's Contempt, of course, and Cast Out in white and black. Really nothing in green you can do about it. And in blue, you can either counter it or bounce it, and that's really not that great either. This would not be consistent with the goal of maintaining the competitive viability of the deck post-ban. Therefore, Ramunap Ruins and Rampaging Ferocidon are banned in Standard. This is in order to reduce the win percentage of red aggressive decks, mitigate overly swingy matchups, and provide more possibilities for counterplay. Again, we expect these decks to remain competitively viable after this change, and I agree. I think they're still going to be good decks. And of course, Magic Online will have a brief downtime today, January 15th, beginning at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, noon Eastern Standard Time. It is expected to last 1 hour to come back up at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time or 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. The new standard leagues available at this time will have these changes in effect, and Rivals of Ixalan limited events will also be available when the downtime is ended. Finally, we will have another banned and restricted announcement next month on February 12th. The timing of this announcement makes it ideal to consider changes based on the results of Pro Tour Rivals of Ixalan, and thus will more than likely focus on Modern. However, it also is right before Grand Prix Lyon, which is Modern. As such, the paper effective date of that announcement, if we should change anything, will be February 23rd, so as to not disrupt anyone traveling to that event. And there you have it, guys. Banned and restricted for Standard. We've got 4 whole cards: Attune, Rogue Refiner, Rampaging Ferocidon, and Ramunap Ruins. This is crazy. I'm in love. Finally, we can play some Rivals of Ixalan and Ixalan cards in the format, and hopefully come to a more concise answer against Energy and against Ramunap Red. I'm so happy for this. It's awesome. But of course, guys, let me know what you think. Do you like this announcement? Do you hate it? Are you really upset about it? I know last week I did the 5 reasons Energy should be banned. Attune with Aether was the first card I wanted to ban, and then Rogue Refiner was right behind that. And then, of course, I had Whirler Virtuoso in mind. And, of course, Long Test Cup was on my list, too. But it was one of those, like, more unlikely cards because it does spend energy instead of creating it. Unless it does get in, of course. But like the video if you like it. Subscribe to the channel for more content like this in the future. I love you guys. Leave a comment below on your thoughts on the bannings. And I'll see you in the next video.